So everyone, I'd like to thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Beth Hendricks. I'm the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Colorado. And for almost 102 years, the League of Women Voters has been empowering voters and defending democracy, holding forums, organizing activities, forming coalitions, testifying, and lobbying. The League's founders were some of the suffragists that marched and fought for the vote. And I'm a fan of trivia. And so I'd like to start with a question. Who knows what the first act on which the League advocated federally? Anyone? Anyone know what the first act the League advocated on federally?
Was it the 18th Amendment?
No, it was not.
I'd guess it was something to do with child labor.
Actually, no, but good guess, Betty. Okay, I'll tell you.
I would guess that. Yes, ma'am.
Michael
Cologne, thank you.
Okay.
I would guess that Colorado is the first state to allow women to vote by popular vote. That was back some time. I don't have the date, so that would be my guess. Thank you.
Good one. That was 1893.
Is that right?
But the first act that the League of Women Voters advocated on at the federal level was called the Cable Act for Independent Citizenship. It passed in 1922. And before that, when American citizen women married men who were not citizens, they automatically lost their citizenship.
Oh my gosh.
If American men citizens married non-citizen women, those women, were up for citizenship. So the League advocated for and got passed this act to allow for women to have citizenship independent of their husbands. It passed in 1922. 1922 was also the first League of Women Voters Get Out the Vote campaign. So fast forward to January 2019, almost 100 years later, and that's when the League of Women Voters of the United States Board approved a position statement on climate change. In response, the League of Women Voters of Colorado has formed the Climate Emergency Task Force to promote the collective actions necessary to combat climate change. The scale of the climate crisis demands collective action, collaboration, and cooperation. It is an emergency. Our task force members are passionate activists fighting climate change. This is not a study group. We are committed to inform and engage members across the state and promote collective actions necessary to address climate change. By increasing the understanding and importance of climate change, we intend to influence public policy and legislation through education and advocacy, and we coordinate our efforts with those of the League of Women Voters of the United States. We also coordinate with local leagues and other organizations advocating for policies to lessen, forestall, or adapt to climate change impacts. We organize climate change webinars, workshops, and presentations on major topics of interest to share, learn, and connect with other members across the state and promote climate justice and equity. At this point, the task force has the following teams: energy, human migration and climate justice, plastics, regenerative agriculture and pollinators, transportation, and water. We are ready to start more teams if there is interest. We currently have 43 members in league groups all over the state. At this point, I'd like to thank the steering committee of this event, Barbara Dungy, Maggie Markey, Pat Messick, Elaine Rideout, Sandy Schuster, Ann Sutton, and Sandy Vandehay. Tonight, we are hoping to learn from 3 of our legislators about bills that we may be able to promote in the coming legislative session. Through action and advocacy in Colorado, we can help bring voters into the process of creating policy in our state that will preserve a legacy for our future. We're asking our speakers to please answer 2 questions in their remarks. Number 1, what legislation might you consider to require industries, businesses, and governments to reduce emissions? And number 2, how will you assist your constituents to fight climate change? Participants, if you have a question for a speaker, please put it in the chat box and we'll do our best to get it presented, though we make no guarantees due to timing issues. We also hope for a quick open Q&A period following each speaker's remarks, and we'll ask you to raise your hand using the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. And now I'd like to introduce our 3 distinguished speakers. A mom, entrepreneur, and community leader, Tracey Bernette is a computer industry expert and engineer from Longmont who has served as the state rep for District 12, covering Louisville, Lafayette, and Longmont since January of 2021. Representative Burnett received an engineering degree from Cornell University and a Harvard MBA. She helped lead the effort to revitalize the Butterfly Pavilion and also led the Our Center's homelessness prevention efforts during the Great Recession, helping more than 16,000 Longmont area families get back on their feet. She currently serves on the House Technology Committee, Energy and Environment Committee, and the State Civic, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. Lisa Cutter represents House District 25, which includes much of unincorporated Jefferson County. After working in public relations and strategic communications, Representative Cutter launched her award-winning consulting firm, Cutter Communications, in 1998. She's led and served on a number of nonprofit boards, including the Women's Bean Project, and provided strategic PR and media relations for the Women's March in 2017. She has also remained involved throughout her 3 children's school years in PTA and accountability committees, with their sports teams, Girl Scouts, and as a classroom volunteer. She currently serves on the Agriculture, Livestock and Water, and Public and Behavioral Health and Human Services committees. Representative Cathy Kipp has served in the Colorado House since January of 2019 as the state representative for House District 52, which is most of the east side of Fort Collins. Cathy moved to Fort Collins in 1985 after graduating with a bachelor's degree in computer and information science from the University of California, and spent 12 years working as a database developer prior to leaving the workforce to raise her twin sons, now 23. Cathy started actively volunteering in Poudre School District schools when her boys entered kindergarten, and she soon became an active volunteer at the school district level. Cathy served as a locally elected member of the Poudre School District School Board from 2011 to 2019, also serving as a term for as board president. She currently serves on the House Education, Finance, and Appropriations Committee. Now, I am hoping that, let's see if Representative Burnett has been able to join us. We're hoping she will go first because she is on a limited time schedule. If she is not here yet, I'm not seeing her yet.
No, I don't think she is.
Okay, then are we okay to start with Representative Cutter? If so, Representative Cutter, please just unmute yourself and jump right in.
Yeah, I'm supposed to make remarks now. I have my questions and answers prepared. I will just tell you that I am thrilled to be here. I love the League of Women Voters. I love everything that you do, and it's always an honor to work with you and have a support from you on issues that always makes me really happy. So I don't work on the the Energy and Environment Committee. I'd love to, but I'm not. I know that's most of my legislation really is in climate change kind of areas. I've done a lot of work in zero waste and recycling issues. I have some bills coming along the way this year in those areas, which I consider a huge, you know, you all know, you're informed, you know that those things greatly impact climate change. And oh, what else was I gonna? So, and in wildfire, I do a lot of work in wildfire, which is also, you know, exacerbated by climate change and sort of a cycle. So those things are near and dear to my heart, and I intend to make that a priority as long as I'm at the Capitol. And I appreciate, it's always really, really wonderful to be in a room or a Zoom room, whatever, a virtual place with folks that are, their heart is in the same place, that they are committed to fighting for climate change and really taking action for it. So thank you. And again, thank you for letting me be here to chat about it today.
Great. Are you comfortable at giving it your best shot to answer these two questions?
Oh, yeah.
Great. So number one, what legislation might you consider to require industries, businesses, and governments to reduce emissions?
Well, this is a hard one because really literally almost anything. I mean, almost anything it needs to be considered and needs to be on the table to encourage businesses to reduce emissions. The points, a couple of things that I jotted down were increasing funding to public transportation, which reduces vehicle emissions, obviously, increasing regulation of oil and gas caps, greater fines, better tax incentives. You know, we need to hold polluters accountable. We need to hold the folks that are creating the issues accountable, and investing in clean energy and displaced workers, you know, just transition, helping to reduce the emissions by shifting to clean energy, but then also helping workers. I think that's a really important piece that we need to consider.
Excellent. Question number two. How will you assist your constituents to fight climate change?
Well, there's so many things. This is a fun one to answer because first I want to key it up and say that I want to give them voice. Like I want to encourage. So I love that. So in assisting constituents, you know, I love to empower young people and talk to them and say, do just what you guys are doing, get together and fight and use your voice and speak out, because I really believe in the power of all of us working together and pulling, you know, in the same direction. So I will empower constituents individually and collectively, groups, you know, school groups, whatever, whenever I have the opportunity. I always am really excited to do that. In terms of specific legislation, there's several things. So I mentioned that I worked in wildfire quite a bit. Wildfire mitigation, you know, we did a number of things. I chaired the wildfire interim committee this summer, and we have a number of pieces of legislation coming out of that. And it's largely focused on mitigation because that's where we get the most bang for the buck, right? That's where we can see the greatest gains. And so just empowering constituents to know the importance of that. We have a public awareness bill coming out of that process that I'll be sponsoring in the House. Senator Story is sponsoring that in the Senate. And so that's empowering them to understand the importance of mitigation and how the role it plays in climate change and wildfire and how that all works together. Also recycling. I mentioned when I first came to the Capitol, I had this big idea. I don't even actually remember all the aspects of a bill that I wanted to run, but I was working with a colleague. I was brand spanking new, and it got off the table relatively quickly. So I decided to ask for a zero waste interim committee. It's quite a process that you have to request an interim committee, and I was awarded the committee. So that was pretty exciting. We spent that summer. So I guess that was 2019, which feels like, you know, 1980 right now, but so long ago, but we've had 2 lifetimes since then. But we spent several months really delving into zero waste and recycling issues in Colorado. And there is massive, and you have a plastics group, I think you said, specialty. And so you guys, you understand there's just massive implications in the overproduction of plastic, and then in the disposal or non-disposal of plastic. It never goes away. There's all kinds of things around that. So by raising awareness about that and removing plastic, the most egregious forms of plastic from regular public consumption, which one of my bills did last year. Oh, is it time? No.
No.
Okay. I heard a clock.
Somebody just joined.
You're good.
So that, and then by increasing recycling, and that's what we're working on. I've worked on those issues before, continuing this year with a pretty big bill called Extended Producer Responsibility. So we will be, producers will have the responsibility to pay for the packaging, that they generate and they create. And then we will use that money. This is a very simplistic, oversimplified view of it. And I'm happy to answer more detailed questions if you have them. But then we'll take those funds and they will be channeled to communities to stand up recycling infrastructure, because we have terrible recycling infrastructure in Colorado and we don't have funding, right? And it's a big patchwork. So this is a way to provide some consistency and some funding, give people the opportunity to recycle, which is doing their part in fighting climate change and waste and plastic pollution. The other thing I'm doing is this year is I'll be working on, we're currently shaping up a PFAS bill, which I know is got climate change implications as well. It's a toxic chemical. So trying to remove that. And that's huge. I'm excited about that piece. And then lastly, one that I really think of this as sort of I really think of this in alignment with climate change, even though it isn't overtly so. But I ran media literacy legislation the past few years, and I know the league has been really supportive of that. In fact, I'm working with some folks to continue our I know you guys have chapters and folks working on it throughout the state, and I've been talking with them about how we continue to perpetuate media relations and media literacy and share it. And I think of that in regards to climate change, because I think if we elevate people's understanding of how to consume media and what's a fact versus, an opinion and all of those things, if we educate people in that regard, then I think we won't quit fighting. I mean, this is a pie in the sky thing, right? It's a long road, but we won't quit. We'll stop fighting about the facts and focus on the solutions. And I think that the misinformation, that's been around for years for political gain, for whatever, for financial gain, by the oil and gas industry, misinformation for years and years and years has created a lot of false narratives out there, and people have dug in, if you will. And I think if we all just looked at the facts, and then we could work together to create the solutions. I really believe people are basically have the best interests of everyone at heart. And if we could just work together to address the problems, things would be a lot better. So I think of media literacy in that regard too. Arming people with information and the ability to discern what's good information is one way that we can all work together to fight climate change.
Great. We do have a couple questions.
Okay.
Can we fund more electric school buses?
Well, the fund piece is always tricky, right? That's a real problem. You guys are educated voters. You know that I'm sure you all understand the landscape in Colorado. I think that's a really worthy goal and something I would definitely support. But finding long-term sustainable funding for things like that would be difficult because we don't even have the money. And Rep. Kipp is on the line, and I know she can probably address this as well. She's very, very involved in school finance and all of that. She's very knowledgeable. And I'm sure she would agree that we barely have the funding to pay for enough teachers, educators, and support them. So it would be difficult. I think it's a great goal and something we should work towards.
Okay. Judith, would you like to ask your question directly of Representative Cutter?
I attended a meeting of the Forest Health Commission this summer, which I didn't even know existed. It was very interesting because they weren't concerned so much about the wildfire, but about the danger to water, to the air, and then the difficulty of revegetating where it's not really soil, but decomposed granite. But 3 of the counties that they talked about, which had experienced wildfire, they all have a fee that they charge people who choose, because people choose to live in the wildland-urban interface. And I say that because I'm in Colorado Springs, and we have somewhere between 35 and 38,000 people in Colorado Springs who live in the WUI, and it's our more expensive neighborhoods. So I've always thought there ought to be, and apparently there are fees like that in some of the mountain communities. And I've always thought if people knew that they had a fee which went first for mitigation and for fighting, they might be a little bit more attentive to the things they're suggested to do, like cut down dead trees and whatnot. But I wondered if that's something that could be legislated.
Well, I have conflicting feelings about that. You know, again, it's sort of that whole complicated tax issue that fees are difficult to legislate in general. I mean, we turn to that for a lot of things, but it's a hard road a lot of times. But the other, I think, even more important piece of that is that like in my community, I live at the base of the foothills, but most of my district is in the WUI. I mean, I'm probably on the edge of the WUI, but the wildlife urban interface. But most of my district is up the mountain. Conifer, Evergreen, Morrison. Conifer and Evergreen, in fact, are 2 of the most at-risk areas in the nation for devastation from wildfire, just because of the density of homes and the property values and so on. But I think of that community, and it would be really hard to legislate a fee because many of them have been living, it's not all, there's certainly some nice, really nice neighborhoods with really expensive homes, but there's also people that have lived there a really long time and that are retired. And that, I mean, we've had this discussion in some of our, we were doing like a tax credit, and one of my colleagues was asking for means testing. Well, you know, what is the value of the home? And I remember arguing about that a little bit because it's different. Just because a home has a high value in the mountains, somebody could have lived there for years and years, right? And being retired and not have a ton of disposable income. So I think that fee thing would be difficult from that perspective. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Can I just say one more thing? I think that there's things, I think that moving forward, I think we should look at ways to better educate people moving into the WUI so that they know and have a commitment to doing the things they need to do, because that directly impacts their neighbors and all of us with air, water, soil erosion, all those things. And then, I lost my other thought. Oh, and then builders. I think we need to continue to explore ways to make building materials, you know, you're knowingly building in a high density, high risk fire area, you need to be accountable and select the proper building materials. And if that increases the price of the home, then I think that's legit to pass that on to the homeowner, and then they can make a decision about it. But I think that's really important. So thanks for that question.
Thank you, Representative Cutter. Representative Burnett has joined us now, and because she does have a short timeline here, I'd like to ask her if she could come on and answer our 2 questions, please.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here. And I'll just jump right into things. Your 2 questions are, and the first one is, what legislation might you consider that requires industries, businesses, and governments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And I'd have to start by saying that this was the focus of a lot of my work this last session. So I want to briefly go through those and then say what I'm thinking in the future. So I passed 8 bills last year that had an environmental angle to them. And and let me start off by saying I'm a new legislator. I'm from Eastern Boulder County. I represent part of Longmont as well as Lafayette and Louisville. And to me, as a new legislator, one of the things I care about so much is the climate crisis we're in. And one of the hardest sectors to decarbonize is the building sector. And so that's really where I focus. It's going to take it's the hardest nut to crack. It's going to take the longest time to decarbonize. So I thought, well, as a new legislator, I'm going to start on that. So one of the first bills I did was House Bill 1238. And this is a gas energy efficiency bill. And let me just, I want to take also a moment, like, what does it mean to, why do we care about gas and energy efficiency and things like that? If we are going to wean ourselves off fossil fuels, we need to make sure that we are, a lot of people are against fracking. They want to get rid of fracking, but you know what? We have to do our part. And that our part is, what are we using to heat our homes, to heat our water, and to heat our food? It's gas, it's natural gas, it's methane, a very powerful greenhouse gas. And so we need to do our part to decarbonize our own buildings. And so that was the premise behind House Bill 1238. It's a gas energy efficiency bill, so we're using less of that methane, but it also provides a path forward for Coloradans to wean themselves of gas to heat your homes and heat your water. So this bill is expected to save Coloradans over $600 million over the next 10 years, just by reducing the amount of gas we use through energy efficiency programs, weatherization, and there's a component to help people who are, lower income, because we really need to bring everybody along on this decarbonization process. I'd have to say it also provides some really good good paying green jobs here in Colorado. And one other thing, it was really the first in the nation to put into statute the social cost of methane. And so, Colorado is really leading the way in many, many environmental bills. And I know that Representative Kipp and Cutter have also been a part of that too, but it's pretty exciting to be a part of this. One of the other bills I worked on was Senate Bill 264, and that's a clean heat plan. And what this does is it requires utilities like the Excels, the investor-owned utilities, as well as municipal utilities, to submit clean heat plans that say, okay, for your customers who heat their homes and businesses with gas, they have to submit clean heat plans that will reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions in those sectors by 22% by 2030. That is first in the nation. Senator Hansen ran it in the Senate. I picked it up in the House. And so that's another thing that's really focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I'd have to say that the great thing about that bill, it requires the utilities to measure how many greenhouse gas emissions are in these building sectors, your customers right now, and then show us a plan of how you're going to reduce it by 22% by 2030. And also it's as close as it can be to enforceable, given the Colorado way, let me put it that way. So it's a really great bill. Another bill that I sponsored is House Bill 1303. And this was, again, a first in the nation in terms of how comprehensive it is. It's called Buy Clean Colorado. And what I put this as is, I'll digress for a minute. One of my favorite parts of doing this bill was when it was 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, and I was speaking before all of my colleagues. I was talking about concrete. And like, who the heck cares about concrete on a Saturday night? And the reason you care about that is the industrial processes used to create concrete and steel represent 14% of the total worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. And if cement, which is the glue that holds concrete together, if that nation be the third largest emitter in the world. So reducing the amount of greenhouse gas emissions it takes to create these products is really significant. And so what this bill does, it requires that state-funded buildings and transportation, think about how much concrete and steel and asphalt is used in transportation projects. It's telling those contractors they must use greener construction materials. So that's another way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Some of the other things, let's see, we got to look at my list here. Senate Bill 108, that was a pipeline safety bill. And, but there was a component of it too that said we need to tighten up the requirements for methane emissions on those pipelines all the way from the time they're extracted to the time delivered to the residents. So tightening up on methane emissions. Another bill has to do, is House Bill 1009. This one was basically approving grants and loans for affordable housing developments that works on energy efficiency. You know, what is going to get us to where we want to go in terms of a zero emissions environment or infrastructure? Half of it is energy efficiency. We're not going to get there just by greening things up. We have to reduce the amount of energy we use. And so, and to me, what's really, really important is to make sure that we are bringing along people, not people who could afford all these things, but people who are really strapped for cash, income qualified folk. And so by improving the weatherization of affordable housing for affordable housing developments, that would really help. So that was some of the bills I worked on this last year. Now, going forward, what are the things I'm doing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions going forward? There's three things I'm working on. The first one is air pollution. We have to improve the air quality. I'm sure everybody's read about how Colorado has some of the worst air quality in the world this summer. And even without the wildfires, we are in non-compliance with the federal requirements for ozone. Ozone, I don't know if you know about it, it's basically, it's a pollutant caused by the burning of fossil fuels. It is, one person described it to me as it's sandpaper in the lungs. Ozone affects children, especially people with asthma and heart disease, people that work outside. I happen to be a world-class runner, but I have asthma and I have to check the ozone levels before I go out and do my workout. And so how is this tied to greenhouse gas emissions? Well, ozone is a greenhouse gas. And so by working on, I'm working on a big bill that has to do with really, really reducing or hopefully getting into compliance with ozone emissions here on the Front Range. And so I'm working with a lot of scientists and air quality specialists. So that's one big bill I'm doing. Another one, I'm continuing to work in the building sector because again, the building sector is the hardest, longest thing to decarbonize. So I'm looking at a bill that spurs a faster transition to fossil fuel-free buildings, a more resilient infrastructure, getting ready for electric vehicles and all those kind of things. A lot of building codes look backwards. And I think because of climate change and because we are going to continue, the climate is going to continue to change. We just have to, we need to think forward. How can we be ahead of the game on that? Another thing I'm working on is the agriculture sector. And it's really exciting. This is a whole new area of decarbonizing the agriculture sector. And one of the key things is going beyond, it's one thing to say, okay, we're gonna stop producing more carbon and putting more carbon into the atmosphere. But there's a lot of really new, exciting technologies in many different areas. One of them is the ag sector. We actually pull the carbon that is already in the air and sequester it. So that's a pretty exciting bill. So the second question that you had was, what legislation might I present to assist constituents in fighting the impact of climate change? I'm so glad that you guys are thinking that way, because, you know, we've got to go beyond. We are in a climate crisis right now. We have to do all of above to get off fossil fuels, to reduce the amount of carbon we're using, all that kind of stuff. But we also, it's happening now. So it's really important that we think about resilience. And so there are two bills that I'll be running. One of them is grid resilience. And if you think about some other states where there has been a crisis, maybe it is having to do with wildfires, and all of a sudden the utility has to shut down the transmission line to a rural community. Well, you know, there are people in communities like all over the state, not just in rural areas, that are dependent on energy, electricity for, you know, like think about hospitals and people and oxygen and all those kind of things. How do we make our grid more resilient? And so this bill is focused on grid resiliency, but also doing it in a way that's smart, that is using renewable energy to do that. The final bill that applies to your question that I'm working on is basically a grant and loan program that invests in building more sustainable and resilient communities. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Excellent. Okay. We do have a few that's come through the chat. One from Ann Sutton. I see Ann here. Would you just like to say your question, Ann?
Yeah, this is, you didn't talk about transportation, the transportation sector as a source of greenhouse gas and air pollutants. And the CDOT and Colorado Energy and Department of Public Health and Environment have just released a study of medium and heavy duty vehicles, and will be proposing rules after the first of the year to regulate this class of vehicles. And I haven't read the whole study yet, but among some of the suggestions, it's a very large proportion of the problem is these large vehicles that may have a lifetime, an average lifetime of 30 years or more. They stay on the road a long time. Their engines are going to pot. Their engines are being more polluting every year. And we need to have some kind of incentives to get these large companies that have these large fleets to start changing over to cleaner engines and cleaner fuel sources. So it's possible we're going to need some financial incentives in addition to expanding our infrastructure, which is already happening. So how would you approach that to get some of those old truck clunkers off the roads? And that includes average households that are running pickup trucks and SUVs, because I'm one of them.
And I couldn't agree more with you. Half of our ozone problem here on the Front Range is transportation. And transportation is also the largest greenhouse gas contributor here in Colorado. So you are absolutely right. And a lot of these old trucks, this is something that I'm learning more about. I have focused, like I said, on the building sector and on energy. Certainly transportation is another piece of that. And there's a lot of technologies that are coming. There's hydrogen. There is using methane from that is used in sewage departments. You know, the sewage treatment plants. They produce methane, which is gas. But then when you right here in Longmont, I've actually toured. This is a renewable natural gas facility that takes the methane from the sewage treatment plant, creates renewable natural gas, and it's used to power the local garbage trucks. So there's a lot of new technology, and it's believe me, it's so much cleaner. And we're producing methane anyway, anytime we use the bathroom. So can we use it to some in a good way? So yes, I'm looking into that. Let's see, what was the other thing I was saying? Oh, yeah, I know what I want to say. I think this in general, the more, I mean, you look at the car manufacturers, a lot of them are now saying they're not going to produce anything but electric vehicles after 2030, 2035. And I think the more that people understand the benefits of electric vehicles, there's some real advantages. For instance, I figured out that I own an electric vehicle and I charge it at night, and my fuel costs, I drive that car about 10,000 miles a year. My fuel costs to run that is $100 per year. That is because these electric vehicles are so much more efficient at converting raw BTUs energy into movement. And I was talking to Boulder County Sheriff Department. They have their first electric vehicle that they are using, and they did a comparison between their standard SUV and what they're using in this electric vehicle in terms of lifetime costs. And they figured it was significantly cheaper to use the electric vehicles, especially because they spend a lot of their time idling. You don't idle electric vehicle. So I think the more that and there's many performance issues. I know I can go on and on about electric vehicles, but the more that I think some of it is, the more that people understand and adopt this. And part of that too is making sure we have the infrastructure to charge these things. So that's why I'm focused on the building sector, that people can, when they will have a place to charge their vehicles at home. And looking at, and some of the work I did this last year was stimulus money to put charging stations in communities. So we need to build out the whole thing. I know it's kind of a long answer, but believe me, I'm focused on it, not this year in a particular bill, but I'm definitely thinking about it. So thank you for the question.
Okay, great. Michael, would you like to ask your question? I know you've had an unstable internet connection.
I can read his answer. I can read his thing right here. And your issue is propane. The secondary heat source is often propane. Well, I'd have to say that that one of the, I don't know if you are on a investor-owned community, if you're supplied by an investor-owned community, or whether you use electric resistance heating or whatever you use to heat your home. Probably if you're on propane as your secondary heat source, it's probably electric resistance heating. Both those things are pretty darn expensive compared to heat pump technology. It's coming. It is so much better. Just in the last couple of years, it's so much more better. It's so much better and actually costs less over the lifetime than resistance heating and propane. And of course, propane, the price, the fuel prices go up and down and all that stuff. So if you're supplied by an investor-owned utility, this is something that there is some incentives coming. It will take a little while to get through the Public Utilities Commission and out to consumers. And I'm still working on that. We're still working on other things that can help you along the way. But I hope I answered your question.
Great, thank you. We did have a question about regenerative ag. I'm wondering if you didn't answer that regarding your upcoming bill.
I'd love to understand what you mean more by regenerative agriculture, just to make sure that we're on the same page. So,
yeah, that was my question. I don't have video. Cathy Norgard in Gunnison County, and I know we have a climate crisis coalition going on here, just, for local issues. And we've found that it's difficult to get ranchers and farmers interested in being educated even about regenerative ag and how new farming and ranching policies can actually improve storing of greenhouse gases. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering if there's anything happening at the Capitol about that.
Well, there are some, the bill I'm working on could have some incentives, but I don't want to promise anything yet. I have to, we're still working through the sausage making process. Uh-huh. But I agree with you. I think it's a big part of this is education. And how do we do that? So I appreciate your thoughts on that, and I will keep that in mind as I work through this bill. No promises, but it's an excellent point.
Yeah, I'll be in touch with you, or I'll tell you what, I'll put my email in the chat, and maybe you could tell me as the bill moves forward and how we could help.
Okay. In fact, you know what I'm going to do the other way? I'm going to put my email in the chat, and you just respond to me, because that's I'm going to do
okay. Great.
Great. Thank you for that, Representative Burnett. I think it's probably time to move on to Representative Kipp. Representative Kipp, are you ready to give our questions a shot?
Yes, I am here. So yeah, thank you everybody for having us today. Really appreciate it. I have to say, it is just, such an honor working with great people like Representative Cutter and Representative Burnett. They do an awesome, awesome job when it comes to this. I did actually serve on the Energy and Environment Committee my first couple of years but no longer. I have moved on to other committees, but Representative Burnett is one of the people who replaced me on it. I always like to say it took two people to replace me, because Representative Burnett and Representative Tatone took over when they moved me off of that and put me onto some other committees. But I just want to say, first off, I think that everybody, at least on our side of the aisle, is really committed to ensuring that we deal with climate change, right? One way or the other. There have been just a ton of bills. So I began in the legislature in 2019, and 2019 was the year when we passed the big oil and gas bill, right? SB 181, which is working to address all of the pollution and climate effects of oil and gas legislation. We also put the climate goals into place. I believe that was Bill 1260 or 1261. I always get that one confused, because one of them was my bill, one of them was the climate change bill. This year we had a lot of big bills. Last year, not as many, because the pandemic kind of cut a lot of things short. I'll tell you a little bit about the bills I've worked on since I've been in the legislature. So my first year in 2019, again, energy efficiency, that was one of the things Representative Burnett mentioned. I did a bill on building codes, and basically the deal is that there's something called the IECC, which is the International Energy Conservation Code for building codes, and all of those codes are revamped every 3 years. And so what my bill said is basically the next time a local jurisdiction like a city or a county redoes their building codes, they need to adopt one of the most recent 3 IECC codes. And if you look at the IECC codes, they actually dropped precipitously back in 2012. And so, we're up to like the 2015 version now. And so every 3 years, they should keep getting better. Now that doesn't, obviously deal with a lot of our current infrastructure. Another bill I worked on in 2019 was the Appliance energy efficiency standards. And what that did is it put a bunch of standards into place, but it included things like not allowing Colorado to roll back its light bulb standards back when the Trump administration decided that they wanted old light bulbs. It was kind of funny. Actually, one guy said he was going to drive to Texas to get his light bulbs now. And I'm like, okay, if that's what you want to do. more power. But actually, that's one of my bills for this year is we will be updating that bill because we put a shall and instead of a must in the bill last time and said that the local state department or state agency could go ahead and update those codes. And they said, no, we just don't have the capacity. So I'm like, fine, I'll do another bill. So that's kind of where I am on that bill. I thought that was unfortunate, but we are get a few other things in that bill as we move that one forward. Let's see, I have my notes here just a second ago, so I can tell you what we're working on. Let's see. Oh yeah, this last couple of years. And so we started the bill in 2020 and then it died. Well, it actually never got introduced during the pandemic year. And that was called benchmarking. It's building benchmarking. And basically what that bill does, it was a really big bill. We finally passed it this year. And it, for large buildings that are over 50,000 square feet, large commercial buildings, it basically is setting standards that will first, they have to measure their energy for the first few years, and then they're going to have to meet performance standards, which align with our ultimate climate goals. So that's what, that was probably, you know, the biggest bill in there. And it's really interesting. I actually met with the American Association of Architects who were kind enough to give me an award for that bill. And actually Senator or Representative Burnett was there too. And we went and toured a local building, which was a net zero building. And I think that's kind of the direction we're going. We have a community up here in my own town in Fort Collins, where it's a net zero community. And so basically it's not using additional energy. So, you know, they'll have like solar panels, they'll have, you know, very efficient shells, and so that it doesn't leak a whole lot of energy, and things like heat pumps, like Representative Burnett mentioned. So there's a lot of good things going on in that world. I think, you know, we had a lot of task forces going on this summer, and you say, well, none of those task forces was on climate change. And I'd say you're right, except that I will also tell you that climate change is embedded in everything we do, right? So for instance, we had our housing task force, which deals with, you know, homelessness and affordable housing. But if you're looking at the housing issue, one of the things you want to look at is how much does it cost a person, especially a person, you know, who's of limited means, to live in that house? How much are their energy bills going to be? So you want to think about things like that. You know, economic development. The chair of our Energy and Environment Committee is sitting on the Economic Development Committee just to make sure that climate change is embedded. So when Representative Cutter said, oh yeah, we consider just about everything, that is true. Let's see. I do have one other bill that I'm going to tell you. I can't really talk about it, but I'm really excited about it for this coming session. But given that we haven't introduced it to people who need to hear about it early on, I really can't talk about it, but just keep an eye out. That should be a fun bill. But I wanted to address some of the comments I saw in the chat regarding, you know, like the school buses and cleaner transportation. A lot of that stuff, and, you know, California buying old cars, all that kind of stuff. So I think, you know, the first part, I think I saw that specifically electric school buses is in the Build Back Better bill. There's a lot of stuff in that Build Back Better bill federally. And I am going to tell you that, you know, here in Colorado, we have a limitation of something called TABOR, which stands for Taxpayers Bill of Rights, but it doesn't do as good of a job as you might think it does, because it actually, we actually had to return money to voters this year, to our to taxpayers, before we fully fund education, before we fully fund transportation, before we fully, you know, work on climate change issues. So we are returning existing revenues without raising taxes to people before we do the things that we need to do as a government. The formula is not very efficient, and frankly, direct democracy is not very efficient because it leads people to vote in their own personal financial self-interest, and you don't always see beyond that initial bill. I would just say be very wary when somebody asks you to sign a petition, because there's a lot of bad stuff out there, frankly. And right now, basically anybody who has a ton of money can pretty much get anything they want on the ballot, because they can just pay by the signature. Last year during the pandemic, during the summer, paid petitioners were getting up to $40 per signature, and some of them would have 3 or 4 petitions. So it's really kind of outrageous, and I personally won't sign any petition that is circulated by somebody who circulates as a paid petitioner, because a lot of times they don't tell the truth and they take advantage of people. I'm just going to say that because I think it's really important, because we're getting a lot of bad stuff on the ballot to vote for. The state has been really focused on the climate change goals. I know they aren't going as fast as a lot of people would like in a lot of areas, but you mentioned, for instance, transportation. You know, some of the bills we passed my very first year, we were really invested in, you know, things like expanding the solar garden. So, you know, giving people ways to get more solar energy. If you've ever driven an electric vehicle, oh my gosh, range anxiety. Have you ever driven an electric vehicle? Those things are scary, because you're like, where's the next charging station? Where's the next charging station? Am I going to run out? And I don't know where to get it. And it's going to take me 2 hours to fill up, right? Range anxiety is real. I test drove one of those once, and I just need the infrastructure to be a little bit better before I go whole hog there. So I think, you know, everybody's invested in it now that California said, you know, we're not doing any, you know, of our traditional engine cars past, what is it, 2030 or 2035. You will see other states going in that direction too. California fortunately leads. And by the way, if you ever go and testify at the Capitol, please don't use the California word, because it just freaks out the folks on the other side of the aisle. And you just don't want to use that word when you're testifying, because if we're doing anything that they're doing, they tend to be pretty unhappy with it. So I think that covers the first question. Do you want me to move on to the second?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I just would like to state for the record that the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization.
And my apologies. I don't mean to imply anything that, you know, anybody might believe, but it is interesting working in the place where I work to see what some people say. You know, as far as climate change, you know, and as Representative Cutter really mentioned in terms of like wildfires and so forth, we do see a lot more bigger disasters, right? We see larger impacts to everything when we have. So one of the bills that we did with some of the money that we ended up having one-time money last year, because we'd cut so much, unfortunately, because of the pandemic. And then the economy bounced back a little bit quicker, and we knew we needed to do stuff. But where I live up in Fort Collins, and I know many other places in the state, in the summer of 2020, they experienced horrendous fires. I know when you looked up in my sky, things look pretty apocalyptic sometimes, right? It was just like this bright orange thing, and that's kind of creepy. So one of the bills that I personally had last year was putting money towards watershed restoration. So we, you know, that involves putting money towards like putting out things like hay bales, or putting things out that we're not going to allow a big rainstorm to come and wash all the sediment away as the rivers, you know, continue to flow. And hopefully they continue to flow, because water and drought is another really big impact that we're facing. So that was one of the bills. Last year, you know, back in 2020, one of my bills had to do with pesticide regulation, you know, to help preserve pollinators. And so because of the, that bill died because of COVID, I mean, so many did not bring that bill last year because it just didn't seem the right time during the middle of the pandemic. So instead we swapped that in and we put in a pollinator license plate bill. And so now as of, I believe, June, I think, or hopefully sooner, Coloradans will have an option of one of the, you know, 100 or so special license plates that you can buy would be a pollinator license plate. And that means basically if you pay the $25 fee and make a contribution to the designated nonprofit, which in this case is the People and Pollinators Action Network, that you're going to be able to get a cute little bee on your license plate, and it'll look really nice. But that's just because we wanted to be able to do something to generate a little bit of revenue in order to protect our pollinators. Because I don't know if you've heard, some of our bees, like our bumblebee populations, are even going extinct, and that's a real problem. Bees provide a lot of food, and some of them are on the endangered species list. And Colorado has over 900 kinds of native bees, and we don't want them to end up there. So anyway, one of my other bills that I have this year that I'm working on with Senator Hawkins Lewis is a pollinator bill, where we'll be bringing back some of the legislation on pollinators from 2020. There were a couple of bills there, and then we will probably be looking at other ways to enhance people and pollinator health and improve the environment. So I think that about covers it for me.
Excellent. And I think that you did answer Terry's question, which is, do you plan to reintroduce the pollinator bill?
Yeah.
So,
but it's what we're doing with it, just like I said, it's going to be one bill with a whole bunch of different parts. It's going to be like a big octopus with lots of tentacles. So.
Great. Now I'd like to open it up to questions for both Representative Kipp and Representative Cutter. Unfortunately, Representative Burnett did need to leave as expected, but does anyone else have any other questions for either of our distinguished speakers? If so, please raise your hand in the reactions, using the reactions button.
She keeps saying we're distinguished, Cathy.
Little does she know, right?
A lot of pressure. We have to behave.
Any questions? Oh, there we go. Sandy. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you for both for joining us. I'm also a member of Citizens Climate Lobby, and I understand that Representative Hooten will be introducing a bill about saying Colorado supports carbon pricing and a dividend bill. Have either of you heard of that or familiar with some of that?
I have heard that she plans to bring that as a resolution, but the unfortunate thing in my book is that first, we don't tend to do a lot of those resolutions. They don't, because they tend to make things very political and we don't actually have any say over it. But as individuals, I think a lot of us have signed on to the Citizens Climate Lobby, carbon dividend piece. And I don't know where Representative Cutter is on that, but that's my understanding of the way it works. It's like it's a statement, and because it's just a political statement, rather than cause division, we a lot of times they prefer we not run those.
True.
Anything further to add there, Representative Cutter?
No, I think that's true. I've only heard rumors. I haven't heard anything specific about what Rep. Hooten is going to be doing, but I think Cathy hit it.
Great.
And if I haven't signed your resolution, I would love to. But I think I have.
Great.
I have a question, Beth, but I can't figure out how to raise my hand.
Okay, we've got someone right ahead of you, Sandy, but you are next in line. Barb Tidd.
I did put this in the chat, and this is to either representative. Will legislation be introduced to provide tax credits or other financial incentives for purchase of electric vehicles to make them more affordable? I know a year ago when I looked at the price of vehicles, electric vehicles were like $10,000 more than a fuel vehicle. That's great that charging stations are going to be all over the state, but we've got to make electric vehicles affordable to people and give them some incentive to purchase them.
You're absolutely right. And I haven't heard, and maybe Rep. Kipp has better intel, but I have not heard of anything being introduced, but I would certainly support that kind of legislation. I think you're right. We need to make it affordable.
Yeah, and I'll just add, we did pass some back in 2019 to continue some incentives, maybe not at the rate they were before, but I just want to tell you for a minute how a fiscal note works. So basically a fiscal note says how much a bill costs and whether or not you're giving people a tax break or, costing or spending money, it kind of comes out in the wash as the same in the fiscal note because it shows that it costs money. And again, Tabor is a huge limiting factor. So I would, and I I have not seen the specific provision, but I've heard of stuff like that in the Build Back Better bill. So I would just encourage people to encourage your Congress folks or your senators to overcome the political stagnation and get that passed, because I think that there's a lot of things that we're unable to do financially here in the state. Not that we don't want to do it, but there's a lot of things that we're just financially unable to do.
Right.
Great,
Well,
thank you. Okay, Sandy.
I would like Representative Cutter to talk a little bit more about the responsibility bill and some of the things that are involved with that, because it's such a complicated process.
It is a complicated process, and we've been stakeholding on it for a little while, and lots of groups are really interested in it. We're looking at, we kind of loosely started basing it off of some legislation in Maine, and I think we've looked at other models in Washington and Oregon. But the basic premise is that at this point, we're moving forward with the idea that we don't want to stand up. So somebody has to collect the fees, right? We're going to assess fees on packaging. I should say at the start there. The fees will be, and again, we're working out all the details of the structure, but the fees will be based on it. My desire is to have them based on the impact of the material, right? So if there's a particularly egregious material, maybe it's lighter than another material, but maybe it's harder to dispose, like plastic film or whatever. And also maybe weight will play a factor. So we're playing around with that, trying to come up with a way to assess the fee in a way that makes sense. Because I really believe that it has to be tied to the damage and impact on the environment. And then once we assess those fees, somebody needs to collect those fees and distribute those fees. So at this point, we're trying to our goal is to not have a government entity, not create an enterprise. I mean, things can always shift as we go down the path, right? But at this point, we're trying not to stand up another government entity. We're trying to create a nonprofit that would be, we would specify and outline rules for operation in the legislation, right? We'd give them guidance on how they had to form and come together and govern this thing. And there would definitely be government oversight. But then this organization would collect and would have people from industry. I feel really strongly like, listen, I believe that people should be responsible for the trash they create. They should be responsible for the pollution they create. Like, we have to involve the responsible parties. People can't handle this and do all this on our own. But I also think that it's going to be much more powerful and stronger if those people are at the table. So to that point, like all of, tons of industry is at the table. A woman from Swire Coca-Cola, who's very involved with Recycle Colorado, is helping us craft this policy, and they're very excited about it. So we want the beverage makers, we want the packaging people, we want everybody at the table so they have some skin in the game and they're committed to it. So I'll listen to any reasonable request from, and I do mean reasonable. I had somebody tell me during the plastic debate at Rep Kipp, I don't know if you were in on this, if you remember this, but I don't think you were there, but they said someone from the, someone who loved styrofoam said that testified that it was just air. It was 90% air, and why we were just legislating air. So things like that are not reasonable. We're not going to listen to unreasonable arguments. But if people do have reasonable things to, that we can negotiate on, we will. So we are involving all industry at the table. They will, in the long term, hopefully govern this organization and distribute the funds, but then the funds will go out to cities, municipalities, communities to stand up their own recycling. And our intention is that everyone has to have curbside recycling throughout the state. And that means for multifamily homes, businesses, everyone. That is the intention, is that everyone will have the opportunity to do curbside recycling and hopefully compost. So but then we give them the funds so that they can stand up the infrastructure they need to. Because to, Cathy's point about the budget and funding and things, we can't do that as a state. We can't say we're going to raise your taxes this much because we need to have recycling, because I could make the case all day long. In the long run, it saves us all money, right? Having a circular economy, having all these materials reused multiple times and having that, I mean, look at now supply chain issues, like that could have an impact to have, we have bazillions of dollars of things in landfills right now. There's tons of resources that are in landfills that we could be using and putting back into our economy. So even though we can make that case all day long, we can't, you know, raise taxes for that kind of thing. So we have to get creative, and this is one way to do it. So then that way communities will have the money they need. Because lots of communities, I'm sure you know, especially like rural areas, do not have the money they need. There's lots of, you know, transportation issues and extra funding concerns in some of those areas. So did that give you a good enough picture of? Cool. I'm excited about it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Carol, Howe, would you like to ask your questions?
Yes, well, maybe just the one tied to the responsibility bill. Will there be some kind of state border adjustment to adjust fees for material packaging that's generated outside the state of Colorado, but that becomes waste within Colorado?
I think we're still kind of figuring out that interstate question, but I think the intention is right now is that, you know, you sell something in Colorado, you pay in Colorado. Doesn't matter where it was generated, but we're still ironing that out.
Thank you. I'll pass on the other one.
Any other questions for Representative Kipp or Representative Cutter? Would any members of the steering committee like to say anything then before we close? Okay, I want to thank everyone for being here, especially our distinguished speakers. And tomorrow we will send everyone who participated a link to this recording as well as the chat text. So you all have access to that. We wish you a safe and healthy new year. And thank you again, Representatives Kipp and Cutters.
Thank you. Thanks for all you do. Appreciate your advocacy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.